Hi guys, it's me, Shazza HD, and welcome to tonight's full review of the 2023 pre-season testing event, I guess you could say, that we had obviously in the last 3 days before today, and was very interesting. We've got definitely some interesting storylines going into this season, and even just into this weekend, we've got some really interesting stuff to look forward to. And yeah, obviously I covered testing in great detail. I covered all of testing except for the morning session on day 1 and day 2, and of course you guys will know if you were there. I covered the entire day of testing yesterday, and yeah, I feel a bit better today. Nowhere near as knackered, so yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. And yeah, very excited going into the season. And given the data I've looked at today, and a lot of that data that I'm going to be, showing on the screen and that during this stream, I think there is very good reasons to be excited going into at least the first race of the season. Obviously, the element of still not knowing absolutely for sure what is going to happen, it does create excitement, but yeah, there are a couple teams that I think are going to get our pulses racing next weekend and maybe a few times in 2023 as well. So just a few things I want to get into before I probably get started. Along the bottom of the screen, you can see on the ticker there, those are the best lap times from testing for each team. So you've got, obviously, in first, Red Bull, then Hamilton and the Mercedes. And I've done it team by team rather than just the 10 best times overall. Because, obviously, if I had that, then you would have, 2 Ferrari drivers, 2 Red Bull drivers in there. Mercedes in there probably a couple times as well. So I don't think it gives a great indication as to, what the best times were team by team. And I've also put there in brackets, as you can see, what compound the times were done on. So, yeah, you can see there the best times for testing. And let me just give an update as well as to how this stream and review of testing is going to work. So I will go team by team, talking about how each team did, how they looked on track. And then, as we go through all the teams, I will get into the data for each team. Not just their best lap time from testing, and also make sure to mention, what tyre it was done on, and, how the car handled on low fuel. I've also got plenty of data to show regarding the race simulations or long runs done by a lot of the teams. And a lot of it is very interesting. And certainly from a couple teams, yeah, some very interesting pace on the long runs that we saw mostly on day 3. So, yeah, we'll be getting into that as we go along, team by team. I will say now, this team on screen, once we get to Alpine, we are not really going to be talking about them. Sorry, if you can hear a cat in the background crying, then apologies about that, but he's decided to start shouting as soon as I start streaming. Yeah, when we got into Alpine, I'm not really going to talk about them because they didn't show us anything in testing. The car looked good on track, but they didn't push with the lower fuel running. And even if you look at the race sims and the long runs, they didn't really show us anything much on there. I mean, they did long runs, but again, they didn't really show that much on that end. So, yeah, it's very, very, very hard to say exactly or around about where Alpine are. Alpine seem to be very confident. Their car looks good. They're bringing an upgrade to this weekend's race. Not this weekend, next weekend's race in Bahrain as well. So they seem to be, yeah, happy and confident of what they've got. And I've, and as I'll get into later, I do have my projected pecking order for the first race in Bahrain, which I'll get into. But yeah, just going to give that heads up that with Alpine, we're not going to really talk about them because, again, there's just not really much to say about them because of what they did not show us. Same as well kind of with the McLaren because they didn't show us a ton either. But yeah, we'll go team by team, look through all the data, race sim data, also what they did with their best lap time, what tyre it was done on, all of that. And then once I've gone through all the teams, I will then get into all of the best times and show them on the screen, with a graphic, as is on the bottom of the screen. It's basically going to be the same display of data as that. And then I'll get into the tyre corrected lap times from pre-season testing, which is kind of interesting. Not super interesting, but it's just kind of interesting to see the difference in pace when you tyre correct it. Because obviously the best times from each team were not set on the same compound. And then, based off of all the data we've looked at up until that point, I'll then get into what I think the pecking order is in qualifying trim for Bahrain, and then the pecking order for race trim for Bahrain, and maybe the first few races of the season. And yeah, some interesting predictions and thoughts I have on all of that, which I'll get onto later on. And of course, during the stream, guys, if you've got stuff to say, comments you want to add, questions you want to ask, and yes, stuff you want to say about how the teams did, the data, and just how certain teams are looking going into the season, make sure to post your thoughts in the comments section and live chat, and I will get to your comments during the stream. I'm not just going to motor on and not talk to you guys whatsoever. So yeah, just letting you guys know about that. And I hope, I can see you all. I hope you're all doing well. Hope you're all having a, great day. I hope you've had a good weekend. And yeah, no matter what time it is in your part of the world, hope you're all good. And I think we'll get started now after that build up. So, let me start off with, of course, the world champions, Red Bull. And Red Bull had, without a doubt, the best preseason testing out of any team. And they do have, without a doubt, the best car. Not just for this weekend, next weekend's race. Not just for the early part of the season. I think Red Bull, even if Mercedes, make improvements, it's already been talked about with Mercedes that, that they're maybe bringing a new side pod concept in a few races that might see them close the gap a bit. Even if that happens, I think you are looking at right now, for the entire season, the best car on the 2023 grid. It is maybe not the best car, I've seen in the last 10 years, but it is pretty much the perfect racing car. Front end is brilliant, no understeer. Rear end is brilliant, just no real oversteer moments we saw during testing. The drivers could push the car and, could get great lap time out of it, and they didn't feel as though the drivers that, there were issues with the handling whatsoever. And from what I've heard, and from obviously what we saw last season, with this aero concept or aero design, obviously, that they've carried over from last year, you have to think the Red Bull is probably still very quick in a straight line. Will it be the quickest? We'll see in the first Grand Prix, because obviously the Bahrain Grand Prix is a great track to see, how the top speed is of certain cars, and also power unit manufacturers because of the very high speed first sector and final sector as well. But yeah, Red Bull, they've got the best car. There is no doubt about that. And I would be very surprised. Of course, I'm going to do my full season preview on Tuesday night. Make sure to come along to that, guys. That'll be 8 p.m. UK time on Tuesday night. I'll get into my full predictions in that stream, but at this current point in time, I would be very surprised if Max Verstappen was not world champion in 2023. I mean, I still need to give it, quite a lot of thought as to my predictions, my final predictions for the season, because at the minute, my mind is kind of still focused on Bahrain, and what's going to happen in Bahrain based off of what we've seen so far from the data, the handling of the cars, etc. So, yeah, I'll have to give that more thought, but I wouldn't be surprised if Verstappen, easily won this year's championship. And Red Bull are definitely going to start, compared to the rest of the field, this season a lot better than they started last season. Of course, last season they were lagging behind Ferrari. Not by a massive amount, but they were the slower team. And then eventually caught up after a few races. But yeah, this season, it's going to take a really great effort to catch up to Red Bull. Because again, they've just got really the perfect car. They've got the top end speed. They've got the speed in the fast corners. Their fast corner speed, by the way, is reported to be their main strength aerodynamically from what the teams have seen in testing. In Bahrain, you don't have too many fast corners, so that won't help them really in Bahrain next weekend. But because of their strengths also in slow corners, which they've still got, compared to a lot of teams, and also their straight line speed, they're still going to be probably the best team in in the first Grand Prix next weekend. But when we get to circuits like Barcelona, Red Bull are going to obliterate everyone. Because the type of car they've got, it is just a great car all around, and they're going to win a lot of races in 2023. And yeah, they definitely had, without a doubt, the best pre-season testing out of anyone. I know Aston Martin, they had a good testing as well, and they look really good. More on that later. But if you're gonna look at all the teams and say who had the best testing, it has to be Red Bull Racing. Now, before we move on to Ferrari, let's get into some data in regards to Red Bull. And we'll start with Max Verstappen. So the best lap time for Max in testing was a 1:31.6 on day 2. He did that on the C3 compound. Obviously, Perez did a 1:30.3 on the C4 compound. If Verstappen had run on day 3, and Red Bull obviously were pushing towards the end of the day a lot harder than other teams were, or than they were obviously earlier in testing, Max probably would have done a very low 1:30 or a late 1:29, I think, in the Red Bull. And I think in a way, as one of my mates said, and one of my mates being Nib, who hopefully will be joining me for the Bahrain Grand Prix next weekend, he even said to me that having Perez do the whole of day 3 was basically Red Bull sandbagging, because we know Max could probably go 3-4 tenths of a second quicker. But when Max on day 2 did a longish run on the C3 tyres of about 10 laps, remember the C3 tyres are going to be the soft compound tyres at next weekend's Bahrain Grand Prix, Max's average lap time was a 1:37.8. Now, you're not going to realise, really, at this point, how good of a time that is until I get onto Ferrari and Mercedes. Because Ferrari and Mercedes, yesterday, in the afternoon session, did some long runs, or longish runs on the C3 tyre for about 15 laps. And yeah, we'll get into their lap times soon. For Sergio Perez, who of course was in the car yesterday, yeah, his best lap time 1:30.3. His average long run pace on the C3 from yesterday was a 1:38.4, and he also did 10 laps on that stint. So yeah, a 0.6 of a second gap between Max and Checo on the longer runs on the C3. If that translates that gap into quali pace, then yeah, Max could be so far ahead of Ferrari and Mercedes in qualifying and the race next weekend. That really could be the case. And it's a scary thought, certainly, for the rival teams. But yeah, Red Bull, as I'll show once we get onto Ferrari and Mercedes and their data, Red Bull in race conditions, qualifying conditions, have got the best car. There is no doubt about that. And they could very well this season have the best car for every single track we go to. That is a possibility, I'm afraid. And yeah, we'll get onto Ferrari and Mercedes in just a second. Of course, I'm going to go onto Ferrari now. Let's just get onto them. And yeah, let's get onto the Scuderia, who have had a decent pre-season testing. Not as good as last season. Last season, I think they appeared, and it was the case that they were definitely closer to being the quickest team. I'll be honest, this time last year after testing finished, I thought Red Bull were probably just slightly quicker, because I remember Max did a really good lap on the final day, and Red Bull brought an upgrade, I remember, to the final day of testing last year. But then obviously Ferrari proved in the first 3-4 races, or first 3 races really, that they had the better car. This season is not going to be as good of a start for them. And why are the reasons for that? Well, Red Bull have built an incredible car. The Ferrari car is good, but there are weaknesses. One of the weaknesses is a new one this year. One of them, though, is an old one from last season that looks to be possibly just as bad, if not worse, than it was last season. So yeah, handling-wise, the front end of the car is fine. The rear end of the car, though, is a bit of an issue. The rear end of this Ferrari does slide around a bit in the high-speed corners, or the higher speed corners, and yeah, that is an issue for Ferrari. I mean, next weekend in Bahrain, it won't be as big of an issue at other tracks if this issue persists through the season. Maybe there's a way of fixing it through setup, who knows. But yeah, it won't be a big restraint on their pace next weekend, because there's not that many high speed corners in Bahrain. But once we go to tracks like Barcelona, Imola, which are not too far down the road. I mean, Imola is the 6th race of the season. Barcelona, the 8th race. Monaco even could be an issue for them if that issue does continue on. Obviously, the British Grand Prix circuit, Silverstone, if they've still got that issue, then it will really cost them there. So that's probably the thing they need to work on handling-wise with the car. No matter whether they're in qualifying trim or race trim, that issue was clear to see from them. But the quali pace from them looked, at least compared to Mercedes, pretty good still. But race pace, not so much with them. And I think we'll get into that now. So Charles Leclerc, he did the best lap time for the team in testing, a 1:31.0 on the C4 compound. In regards to the quali pace, obviously Lewis Hamilton, we'll get to soon, he did a 1:30.6 on the C5, which was a really good time. Ferrari can definitely go faster. I mean, yeah, Leclerc did his time on a 1-step harder compound, but also Lewis Hamilton kept doing more fast laps than Leclerc did in the morning session and Sainz did in the afternoon session. So Ferrari can definitely show more quali pace, and I do think in Bahrain next weekend, Ferrari will be faster than Mercedes in qualifying. In the race, though, it's going to be a different story. Now, with Leclerc, his average lap time on his race run on the C3 And he did about, I think, 12, 13 laps at least on the C3. And that was from, I think, either the morning session on day 3 or the afternoon session on day 2. Leclerc's average lap time was a 1:39.8. Now, the reason that's so poor compared to what Verstappen did isn't necessarily because the Ferrari is 2 seconds slower, every single lap or anything. It's because of the tyre degradation. The Ferrari started off doing good times, but then the lap times fell off a cliff. And that is the second big issue for Ferrari this season. Their race pace looks to be pretty bad compared to, say, Mercedes, Red Bull, even Aston Martin, as I'll prove later in this stream. It's going to be an issue this season. And we saw that last year. Their race pace was pretty poor towards the end of 2022, sorry. So, yeah, that's going to be an issue for them this season. So, if they're going to win races in 2023, they're going to have to get pole position. Because if they don't, then they're just going to fall back down the field. Not, massively or anything. They're not going to be, falling down to 7th, 8th place. But, or, out of the top 10 or anything like they did, 2020, 2021. But, yeah, the race pace is an issue, a big issue. Carlos Sainz, though, had a more representative race simulation on the C3, and he did his, of course, in the afternoon session yesterday, so let's get into that. And Sainz, his best lap time for the team was also a 1:31.0, so yeah, the two best times for Ferrari, basically the same lap time. His average lap time on the C3 when he did his race simulation, and he did about 15 laps, around about 15 laps, about 5 more obviously than Max. His average lap time was a 1:38.7. Now, again, if you compare that to Max, and I'll just go back to Max, who did his race run on the C3 on day 2, but in the afternoon session as well, so in similar conditions, he is almost 1 full second quicker on average. And again, the big issue for Ferrari, and the reason why on average it was that slow, is because of the degradation. The Red Bull, if you go and look at the lap times that Max did in that stint, the Red Bull is, there is some tyre degradation. The Red Bull starts to get slower, but it takes quite a while to get to that point by the looks of it. With Carlos Sainz's, by the looks of it, he does 2 or 3, good laps, and then it really starts the tyres to degrade and the lap times really start to drop off. So yeah, in terms of Red Bull versus Ferrari in Bahrain, Ferrari are going to have to get pole position if they're going to win the race. If they don't get pole, there's no way they're winning the race, because the pace on heavy fuel and their ability to look after tyres is just way too bad. And to be honest, Ferrari are going to do well to get on the podium probably in Bahrain with this lack of pace, with heavy fuel. So yeah, not looking good on that end for Ferrari. But they've got good qualifying pace. They've got good horsepower from the power unit. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Ferrari, it's doom and gloom. But yeah, it's going to be a tricky season. And they're not going to win too many races. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an absolute failure of a season. But yeah, if you're a Ferrari fan going into Bahrain, just don't have the highest expectations. I know people are saying, Ferrari, in Bahrain next weekend, they're going to be fighting for pole. I even was saying that before Sergio Perez started doing those seriously quick times, which completely changed my opinion. Ferrari, they're going to be more so podium contenders than race-winning contenders. I'd be very surprised if they won the Bahrain Grand Prix next weekend on pure pace. They need really Red Bull to have a double DNF to have a chance. Because even if Max retired, Perez, by the looks of it, has got the pace easily to still win the race if Max was to retire next weekend. So, yeah. It's going to be a tricky season, like I said, for Ferrari. There is potential there on a Saturday, probably this season. But on a Sunday, yeah, it's going to take a monumental effort or a bit of luck, quite a bit of luck, for them to win races in 2023. And of course, Mercedes are going to be very competitive this season. Or later in the season, Mercedes will get more competitive because Mercedes do tend to develop better as a team than Ferrari do over the course of a season. And Mercedes do have a slight bit extra wind tunnel testing time than Ferrari do. So, yeah, I think numbers-wise, in terms of wins and podiums, this season probably will be worse for the Ferrari team, but I think there's other ways where they can be successful, put it that way. But, yeah, going into the first Grand Prix, like I said, I think it's going to take something really special from Ferrari to win the Bahrain Grand Prix, and even at least get onto pole position. It's going to take something, like I said, very, very special indeed. But anyway, let's now go on to the Mercedes-Benz team, who had a pretty eventful testing, the most eventful out of the top three teams. Day one was very positive. There was no real porpoising, and to be honest, the whole test, there was no real porpoising. They have absolutely got on top of that issue. Yeah, day one, the handling looked good, and Mercedes were very happy. Then day two came. Suddenly, we saw a really bad loss of grip from the Mercedes in the rear end out of slow corners, which we also saw. You might remember me talking about it on day three with Lewis Hamilton on his faster laps. The rear end really stepping out a lot, but it seems as though Mercedes did fix that issue to a certain extent for Hamilton. So, I mean, maybe that'll come back to haunt him for the season and at least next weekend. But yeah, that was definitely an issue. Russell, of course, had a hydraulic failure on day two as well, which obviously wasn't good. They had a big team meeting in public, which, was not great. A great look for the team, I guess you could say. And then, yeah, day three still had some issues. Pace was a lot better. It seems as though they did get over the issues, though, to a certain extent. So I am definitely a lot more positive in my thinking about the Mercedes team going into 2023. So, yeah, it's looking better than it did, on day two and even, say, halfway through day three, because my hopes were really not that good. But I think Mercedes have got definitely quite a bit of a better car at the start of this season than they had at the start of last season. They're probably not close enough at all to fight for victory at the start of this season. They're going to need to bring quite a big upgrade package, soon into the season, like race 4, 5, 6 time, which is Baku, Miami, or Imola, to really close the gap to Red Bull, who look as though they're quite far ahead of the Mercedes team. But yeah, I think there's definitely hope that they can, compared to Ferrari, start the season a lot better. And I think there's a pretty good chance this season that Mercedes finish ahead of Ferrari in the championship, as I'll get onto in a moment with the data, which looks good for them from a certain angle, at least to start the season. But yeah, Mercedes, they've had their issues. Looks as though they've got over them and they've found ways to get around them. Wasn't great, obviously. They had a hydraulic failure, but I think going into this first Grand Prix, I think they could probably get a similar result to what they had last season at the same Grand Prix, which was 3rd and 4th. I think that's possible next weekend, but I don't think if you're a Mercedes fan, you should get too ahead of yourself and start thinking that because Mercedes are starting this season better off overall compared to the rest of the field, compared to start last season. I don't think you should get too ahead of yourself and think that, Mercedes are going to start winning races by, Saudi Arabia, Australia. I think that would be pretty incredible if they did. And I think if they win races in 2023, which I think is definitely possible in the second half of the season, which of course will help them the second half of the season, because they'll be able to develop their car for longer than Red Bull because of Red Bull's deduction of wind tunnel time for the cost cap thing, and also because Mercedes finished lower in last year's championship. And if Mercedes do move by the time we get to the start of the European season, if they do move to that newer or different alternative, I guess you'd call it, side pod concept that looks more like the Red Bull, if they bring that to the track and it really improves the pace by, 0.3 to half a second, then I think there is a decent chance in the second half of the season that Mercedes can win 2 or 3 races at least. But in the first few races, I think it's going to be very hard for them to win a race. I think podiums regularly is definitely possible and even probable for them, as long as they stay reliable. But yeah, winning races, probably going to have to wait until after the summer break for sure to see that, or at least see the chances of that be, pretty good. So yeah, if you're a Mercedes fan, Hamilton fan, Russell fan, don't get too overexcited for the start of this season. If they could just try and be best of the rest after Red Bull, I think that'd be pretty good. Let's get into the data regarding them. Lewis Hamilton did the best lap time for the team at 1:30.6. That was on the C5 compound. Charles Leclerc, obviously, his best time and best time for Ferrari in testing was a 1:31.0 on the C4. Ferrari, they, like I said, with what when I went through them, they could have gone faster, obviously, if they'd gone on to the C5. But also, I do think they're holding a bit back in terms of using as much horsepower as they actually have. They still, reliability is a concern for Ferrari because obviously Alfa Romeo had a breakdown, which I think is related to the Ferrari power unit, the reasoning for that. So yeah, I do think over a single lap, Ferrari have got the better car, at least for the start of the season. But Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton, his average lap time on the long run on the C3 was the exact same as Carlos Sainz yesterday. And they did, I think Hamilton may have done 2 or 3 less laps on his run on the C3. But I think that's actually a positive thing that Hamilton did the same average lap time as Carlos did on the C3, with similar laps done on it in a similar part of the afternoon session. So you can't say, conditions were different and stuff like that. So yeah, that looks, I think, good for Mercedes. And I think, my prediction, at least for Bahrain, is that in the fight with Ferrari and Mercedes, Ferrari will be faster over a single lap, but in the race, Mercedes will be faster than Ferrari, which is pretty much what we saw in the second half of last season. Ferrari would outdo Mercedes in qualifying, and then in the race, Mercedes, through better tyre wear, just better pace, would outdo Ferrari, outscore them, and get better finishes. So I think in terms of pure race pace, I think Mercedes are better than Ferrari right now. And remember, for next weekend's Grand Prix, Mercedes are bringing a lower downforce rear wing, because during testing they were running a higher downforce rear wing, more akin to what you would run in Barcelona or Monaco. So Mercedes might even, you never know, if Hamilton pulls out a really good lap and Mercedes' pace is good, Hamilton might be best in the rest after the 2 Red Bulls. So yeah, I mean, if they can start the season as the second best team overall, then I think that'd be pretty good for Mercedes. Obviously, the gap to Red Bull will still be very concerning, but progression is progression, and it would still be progression for them. But yeah, in terms of the top 3 teams who, last season were the top 3 teams, not necessarily sure there are going to be just 3 top teams. I think there might be possibly 4. I'll get onto that in a second. Yeah, comparing Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes, like I said, with the data, Red Bull much quicker over a single lap, much quicker in the long runs as well. Again, you saw with Verstappen, his average lap time on the C3, 1:37.8. Hamilton and Sainz, Mercedes and Ferrari respectively, about a second slower. And they both did about the same amount of laps on their stint. So yeah, Red Bull have got the best car. And then Ferrari, Mercedes, pretty hard to say. We'll have to see what happens in Bahrain. And then obviously going on from there. But let me know, guys, do you agree or disagree with what I've had to say about Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes? Let me know in the live chat. And I'll come to you guys in a few moments' time. Because next, I'm going to get into one team that I guess you could say is the talk of the town, the F1 town, right now. And we'll get into them, yeah, right now, before I come to you guys in the chat. And let me just get it all right. So here you go. Let's go on to them. Aston Martin, who after Red Bull could probably say they've had the second best test in terms of the biggest gain from last season. Not necessarily because Aston Martin are the second best team, but because, yeah, Aston Martin have had the, such a big gain from last season. And it is such a positive to see Aston Martin gaining so much lap time. And this is really what we hoped to see. That was our hope coming into testing, is that Aston Martin would turn up and be miles quicker than they've shown, or than they showed last season, and even at the very start of last season. And yeah, they have absolutely proven that. Alonso has looked great in the Aston Martin. The lap times have looked great. The handling looks very good. Front end, rear end, absolutely no issues with it at all. Not sure about the straight line speed. I mean, you have to assume with the Mercedes power unit that there are still issues with that. So Aston Martin, maybe in Bahrain, won't be as quick as they will be at, say, more aero dominant tracks. Monaco, Spain, tracks like that, which are, like I said, not too far away. But, yeah, it looks very positive for Aston Martin. No doubt about that. Looks very positive for Aston Martin. Obviously, day one was a bit mixed because they had the breakdown for electrical issues with Drugovich, and then Alonso lost a bit of time running on day one. But after that, it went very smoothly. And yeah, the lap times on the long runs look very good. Very good. And yeah, when I get to them in a minute, you guys are going to get very excited. Trust me, you're going to get very, very excited by them. And yeah, the pace of the car over a single lap looks good as well. Obviously, their best lap time of testing Aston Martin compared to the other midfield teams, isn't the best. Obviously, they're slower than Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, and Haas. But they did do their best time on the C4. And when Tsunoda, Magnussen, and Bottas did their best times, it was on, they did theirs like an hour and a half later than Fernando did. So they had obviously access to better conditions. And I don't think Aston Martin necessarily pushed it as hard as they could on the fuel load. So, yeah. And I would say at this stage that Aston Martin are probably going to be at their strongest in the race than they are in qualifying in 2023. Qualifying pace looks good, but I think their race pace looks really, really exciting. And yeah, we'll get to that in a second. One thing I did want to say quickly was, for people wondering what's happening with Stroll. Lance Stroll, we believe, the issue, firstly, with him is his wrist in terms of his injury he's got to his arm, hand area, and wrist area. And is still a doubt for next weekend's Bahrain Grand Prix. And Aston Martin have announced that if Lance Stroll is unable to compete, that Felipe Drugovich will 100% be driving in his place. So, if Stroll, like I said, if he cannot drive, it will be Alonso and Drugovich in the car, which is the most sensible decision because Drugovich obviously did the morning session on day 1 and day 3 and has probably a pretty good understanding of the car now after about 8 hours of testing with it. And, you know, he is the Formula 2 champion. He at least deserves a chance to show what he's got. Not saying he is deserving of being in Formula 1 or anything, but he at least deserves to show what he's got as a racing driver. And yeah, Formula 2 champion, of course, for 2022. And is still officially the Aston Martin reserve driver. But, yeah, we'll see how that whole situation plays out. To be honest, it'd probably be good to see Stroll in the car, even though Stroll probably will take some time to get back up to speed because it sounds like his injury is not, great. I don't know if it's broken, his wrist. I've myself have broken my wrist on both wrists. I think more than once. So, yeah, I know all about wrist injuries. It really is annoying. But, yeah, I don't know how serious it is. Hope it's not too serious, because if he does come back for this weekend's race, then it's probably going to take a bit of time for him to get up to speed. And he won't be able to optimize and fully utilize the pace of the car, unfortunately. So, yeah, we'll see what goes on with him. With Lance Stroll. Also, just want to say, if there is any issues with the stream in terms of the stream seeming a bit laggy, sorry about that. My PC is a bit, how do I describe it? Slow tonight. So, yeah, I'm just apologizing if there is any issues to do with that. Anyway, let's get into the data with Aston Martin, which, like I said, is very exciting. So the best time for the team, a 1:31.4. And then let's get into the race run data. So Fernando Alonso in the, what do you call it? In the, what am I trying to say? In the afternoon session yesterday of day 3, Alonso, you may remember, he did a few low field laps, which is how he got to the 1:31.4 on the C4 tyre, and then he did a race run. And the lap time you're seeing from the average lap time you're seeing for the C3, C2, and C1 is the result of that run. So I just want to clarify first how he did this run, or how Aston Martin did this run. So he started on the C3. Then he went on to the C1 and then ended on the C2, which is why the C2 average time is so quick, because obviously his fuel load would have been a lot skinnier than he obviously would have been on the C3 compound. But what is so exciting is, yeah, that average lap time, 1:38.7. That's the same average time as Hamilton and Sainz did on the same tyre. And obviously Hamilton and Sainz, their stint was about 15 laps, and then I think they came back into the pits. Alonso obviously continued on and did a full race run and did like 56 laps or something. That is so exciting with that fuel load. I'm not saying that Mercedes and Ferrari weren't running maybe more fuel than 15 laps worth, but that has to get you excited. And even Toto Wolff has said that according to their calculations, Aston Martin might be the second best team over a race distance at the minute. Will that be the case in Bahrain next weekend? We'll see. Obviously, Mercedes are bringing a new rear wing, a slimmer rear wing to help with the top speed. Ferrari will up their power and show more power next weekend as well. But if that average lap time does not get you excited, then I don't know what does. Again, especially considering he then did another, 40 laps after that run on the C3 tyre and obviously worked down his fuel load. Yeah, really exciting. And then obviously after that, he pitted from the C3 onto the C1 tyre. His average lap time on that was a 1:37.5. How good of an average lap time is that? I mean, by the time he came to the end of that C1 run, the C1 stint, he probably was going, in terms of his fuel load, probably about a second quicker with his fuel load than he was on the C3. So really, I'd say the average lap time he did on the C1 was just as good as what he did on the C3, which was really good. And then vice versa for the C2, which was another second on average quicker. And that C2 stint he did was, again, the final stint where his fuel load would have been getting down quite a bit. But yeah, I am so excited after looking at all this data. And it's not just me that's excited, also Aston Martin very excited. F1 journalists even have been saying that, yeah, Aston Martin are a serious threat this season because of the race runs we saw yesterday in Bahrain. Again, even Toto Wolff said Aston Martin might be second quickest in Bahrain. We could possibly have 4 front-running teams this season. We really could. And again, if that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what does. But these average lap times that he did on his long runs are phenomenal. They really are. They are incredible lap times. Again, considering how long the overall stint was and how much fuel he had on board, it's an incredible long run he did. The pace is just wow. I mean, it's not Red Bull levels or anything, but it is it's really wow in terms of the times he was doing. And another thing that was really exciting, if you go and look at the stint he did, during each stint, his lap times, during a stint, normally in F1, your lap times get slower as the tyres degrade more. Obviously, the teams who do better, normally their lap times don't degrade as much as others. With Alonso's, his lap times started getting quicker. He was getting quicker during the stint. Not slower, quicker. Again, I am super excited about Aston Martin this season. I am really excited. It's hard to describe in certain ways just how excited I am. But I cannot wait to see Aston Martin on track. I think they're the team I'm really looking out for in Bahrain, because I'm just hoping to God they are on the pace of Ferrari and Mercedes, and they are as quick as this in the race. Because if they are, remember, they have a lot more aero testing time in the wind tunnel than the top 3 teams do for this season. So in the second half of the season, who knows what Aston Martin can do? Sky could be the limit in terms of results for this season. They're not going to be championship contenders, but podiums, I think, are definitely possible, and maybe even, dare I say it, a race win if the conditions are right and there's a bit of luck involved. Because I don't think they've got the best car or anything, but yeah, dare I say it, I think there is a chance they win a race this season. And we know, of course, how good Alonso is, no matter the car he's in. I mean, look at the Alpine last year. It was the best midfield car, yet sometimes he was in the top 5 in the race results. So, yeah, I cannot wait to see Aston Martin in Bahrain. Cannot wait to see Aston Martin in Bahrain. It is going to be very exciting to see what they do. And I would just love it if we get, Alonso, in Bahrain up against Hamilton, Leclerc, Sainz, and that would be perfect. It would definitely keep us excited if indeed it is a Red Bull 1-2 and they are, like a second quicker than everybody else. Yeah, I cannot wait to see what goes on in Bahrain. Let me know, guys, in the chat. Do you think Aston Martin, from everything we've seen, the data I've showed, and the context I've added to that data, compared to all the other teams, do you think we have 4 front-running teams this season, or is it just 3? Let me know in the live chat, and I'll get to your comments in just a second. About to come to them in a moment. Just want to say quickly, if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, because I will be live so many times next week. Tomorrow, by the way, I'm going to post to my community tab my full slate of content for the month of March, and I, typed it all out, and I've already scheduled the post. It'll be the post will be released, I think, very early tomorrow morning. And I went through and counted all of the videos. There's going to be, on average, videos or streams in March, at least 1 video or stream every 2 days during the month of March. So yeah, plenty of content next month. And of course, next weekend is March and the first Grand Prix. And I will be live covering, obviously doing a weekend preview. I'm going to be doing a practice 2 watch along, qualifying preview, practice 3 watch along, qualifying watch along, race watch along, and a review even on the Monday, the day after, on Monday night. And also, I'll be doing a sprint race watch along for Formula 2. So if you are new to the channel and you want to keep bang up to date with everything that goes on the first Grand Prix weekend of the season, but make sure to subscribe to the channel, bottom right of the screen. You can do it right there. And for everyone watching right now, if you have not already, don't forget to smash that like button. But I will quickly just move back onto these. And yeah, for the next few minutes, I'm going to get onto your comments. So keep them coming, and I'll read them out and answer them. And yeah, hello to F1. Great to see you all. Adam says, or asks, how long do you think Stroll is out for? Any reports on that? No reports on that for the minute. We don't know still if he is going to be out for this weekend's race. We don't know. There has been some people thinking that Aston Martin are like covering it up in terms of how bad maybe his injury is, but I don't think that's the case. I think what's happening is he's injured his wrist and hand in a cycling accident, and there is a chance that he could race in Bahrain, but they don't know for sure yet, which is why they're not saying anything in terms of, his exact condition and whether he is going to race. So yeah, I think they're just in not in the dark as much as us, but I think with them also, they don't know for sure, whether he'll be able to race in Bahrain or not. So yeah, we'll probably find out, I'd imagine, by Wednesday night whether he's going to race, because if they're going to put Drogovic in the car, they'll want to do, on Thursday, the seat fit. Obviously, they did the seat fit of him and testing and all, but they'll just want to make sure they, get that all sorted, because I'm assuming they'll still prepare as normal as if Lance Stroll's going to be in the car. And yeah, I think for Thursday, they'll just want to, make sure that they know for sure who is alongside Alonso for the first race. Scepter, Skepta 007 says, you're doing an amazing work, mate. Keep it up. Thank you very much for that. Let me find some other comments here. Tony Touch asked, didn't Alonso do 37.7s for a number of laps? Yeah, he did do, I think, during one of his stints, some very consistent lap times. I think it was probably during the C1 tyre run, which was the middle stint on that stint I showed. And yeah, he did, C3 to start with, then he went on to the C1, then went on to the C2 to finish off. Vincent says, hey, y'all, getting ready to fire up the grill. Can't wait to be back in my local pub at 8 a.m. watching races. They're not serving, but the TVs are on. Great to hear. Tony Touch, new rear wing for weekend. Less drag, more grip. Well, it won't be as much grip through probably the higher speed corners, but at the end of the day, Bahrain is a power circuit. If you've got aerodynamically a good car, but you're really lagging quite a bit behind in straight line speed, then you're not going to be able to show your full potential of pace. So Mercedes, of course, have got to find a way to show their full potential. And if a lower downforce rear wing is the way, then that's going to have to be the way for them. Right, let me try and find some more comments. Dylan Forrestal says, Fernando will drag that car to a championship challenge. Watch, that would be, just incredible if he did, but I don't think, I'm not going to go that far just yet. Brother Moz, the problem is, even if Mercedes make a massive leap in their car development by 5 or so races time, Red Bull will be miles ahead points-wise. Exactly, that's why I'm saying championship-wise, do not be thinking, Mercedes fans out there, that you're going to win the title this season, because, by the time Mercedes make a big leap forward in development, if that does indeed happen, Red Bull are going to already be quite a bit ahead. I mean, let's say, for example, Red Bull... Well, actually, hold on. So, let's say, for example, Mercedes, for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, which is the 6th race, if they bring a B car, basically, a new side pod concept, and it makes the car, I don't know, half a second at least quicker, if not nearly a second a lap quicker, and puts them almost on the pace of Red Bull or something, by then, if Max wins the first 5 races and Hamilton finishes 3rd in the first 5 races, then the gap's going to be 50 points, which is 2 race wins worth of points. And obviously Max would have to have 2 DNFs and Lewis 2 race wins at that point, if that did happen, for Lewis to get 11 in the championship. And we know how reliable the Red Bull is, or has been, since, say, early summer last season. So, yeah. In terms of my season predictions, which, like I said, I'm going to get into my full season preview on Tuesday, I can reveal that I'm definitely not predicting a championship challenge from Mercedes. I think they'll win races this season, Mercedes. I'm not saying Red Bull are going to win every race. And I think the second half of the season, Mercedes are going to be a lot closer to Red Bull than they are now. But first half of the season, I think it's going to be the Red Bull show. And I'd be very surprised, actually, if Red Bull did not win every race up until the British Grand Prix, which is race 11, I think, of the season. Second week of July, I think. So, yeah, it's going to be very hard for Mercedes or anyone to put up a title challenge unless Red Bull trip over themselves with reliability and stuff like that. Anyway, G Walker says, I agree with the top 3 for sure. And then the paddock chatter, here we go, Aston Martin, but we have Daddy's darling, Daddy's darling, young Lance. How solid can he be? Fernando can take it all the way. I think with Aston Martin this season, I think what it might be similar to with them this year is when they obviously were racing point in 2020. Of course, that year, the reason they were so quick is because they basically had a year-old Mercedes car. But you remember that season, they, jumped up massively and were really super quick. I think Aston Martin could be in for a similar season. And, well, were Racing Point a front-running team that year? Yes and no. They were. Sometimes they were not also. certain weekends. Obviously, that year they won a race. They had a pole position in Turkey as well. So maybe that is the potential of the Aston Martin this year. But the rate of improvement that Racing Point had, obviously same team as Aston Martin now, the same development spike that Racing Point had from 2019 to 2020 is very similar to what Aston Martin have had from last year to this year. And it's not because Aston Martin have copied, the Red Bull design. It does look a lot like the Red Bull, but it is not like the Red Bull. There are differences. Of course, Dan Fallows used to work at Red Bull, now Aston Martin. It's working great for Aston Martin. But, I think this could be a really good season for them. And if they are a front-running team this year, then really they should be until at least the end of 2025. Because I don't think they'll just be a good team this year and then drop off. I think they'll just keep coming back for more. Tony Touch says Aston Martin will be Mercedes. Other direction indicator. Dylan Forrest still says, if that car is second or third, Fernando will challenge for the championship. You just watch. He'll drag that car to places it should not be. That's why I'm very excited about Aston Martin this year. Because, we know what Fernando can do if he's just within a certain amount of tenths of a second to another car. We know he can still fight with those cars that are probably faster in certain aspects. But, I'm really excited for Bahrain. In qualifying this season, I don't expect Fernando to do too much craziness, I guess. But in the races where Fernando's at his peak, and also the Aston Martin looks to be at its peak, could it be a match made in heaven? We'll see. Mickey says, I feel Aston will fall off over the season, but I hope I'm wrong. That would have been true 5 years ago, but remember, because of the budget cap and the aero testing rule where certain teams are only allowed a certain amount, and teams lower in the championship from the previous season are allowed more than the teams at the top, I don't think that's going to be a thing that happens anymore. I don't think Aston Martin are just going to get out-developed because of resources and money. Let's remember Lawrence Stroll has a lot of money as well. But, I think Aston Martin will at least be for this season, let's say in Abu Dhabi, obviously the final race, they will be as competitive in Abu Dhabi at the very worst as they were, or as they are going to be this weekend in Bahrain. Because I don't see the top three teams being able to outdevelop Aston Martin that much. Because again, Aston Martin have quite a bit more time allowed in the wind tunnel this year. And, really the top teams, because of that, they won't be able to really develop their cars past the summer break. Aston Martin will still be able to develop their car probably in the month of September. And that will, really help if they can find, at that point of the season, an extra 2 or 3 tenths of a second. Hello, everyone. I'm sneakily watching this during church/mass. Good commitment there. Mickey asks, are you praying for an Aston win? Honestly, I think, I probably would. I think, Formula One, after last season, which was an exciting season to a point, I think it would really be great. And it would be a great showing of these new regulations in the last couple of years that Liberty Media have imposed of, the budget cap and the aero testing rule, where the lower down teams get more time to develop their cars than the top teams. I think it would be a great showing for that and show that probably in a couple years at the end of these regulations and even into, the new set of regulations in 2026, I think there's a pretty good chance that that we get, instead of 3 front-running teams, we could have 5. It could be like it was back in 2012, in like 2 or 3 years' time, because of those regulations. So I am hoping that they are legitimately that quick, because it would be great for Formula One. It'd be great for our excitement. And who doesn't want to see Fernando Alonso for the first time in 10 years fighting back at the front of Grand Prix again? It's been too long. We've been, we've been teased way too long. So, yeah. I really hope we get Fernando back at the front. Aston Martin will be what Mercedes were in 2010/11. Maybe, yeah. Mickey says 4 at the start, but 1 or more teams will fall off later in the season is my guess. Dylan Forrestal says, I think we have... let me read your name again, because I think I ruined that. Dylan Forrestal. I think we have 4, but I think it will be only... it will be Alonso only at the front for Aston. He will do what he has done for years and outperform the car. Yeah, I think Alonso will definitely be the main one for Aston. If Stroll, though, could get over his injury and get back on form, remember, on a race day, he's not a man to be doubted. I mean, he could have won the Turkish Grand Prix a couple years ago, and his performance that weekend was out of this world. And we've seen many times on a race day that Stroll is, not someone to be doubted. So don't count Stroll out. He could also be a surprise contender maybe at times this season. Let's find some other comments here if I can. Rodriguez says, and those runs got faster and faster while the others experienced massive deg. And Michael Jones saying Aston tyre deg was nothing. Yeah, I think that's the most exciting bit about that data, is that not just he was doing those lap times on average for the stints, but also he got faster as the stint went on. Like, too good to be true, maybe? I mean, we'll see next weekend, but that has to get you excited if you're an F1 fan, because the possibilities are, really incredible. I mean, I thought there was a pretty good chance Aston Martin would jump forward quite a bit this season, but I didn't think it would be like this. This is mental. A mental leap forward. And another thing I wanted to say with Aston Martin was, so Alonso's best time in testing was a 1:31.4. The best lap time Aston Martin did in qualifying for Bahrain last year was a 1:32.7 on, what was it, the C4 or C3? I can't remember exactly. And it was Nico Hülkenberg who did that lap time, of course, because Sebastian Vettel was ill with COVID. So, 1.3 seconds quicker than their best time in qualifying at the same track last season. And we haven't even got to the first Grand Prix weekend at the same track. I know Aston Martin have made a lot of progression since then, but 1.3 second gain already. We're not even into the first Grand Prix weekend. That, again, the leap they've made is, it's got to be the biggest leap forward that we've seen in a long time without there being a regulation change between seasons. I know there's been slight changes, like I think a bit of cutting of the downforce on the floor area, but really big leaps in performance like that you don't see when the regulations have been stable from one year to the next. It is rare to see that. Like I said, Racing Point in 2020 is an example of that, but again, their car was just a year-old Mercedes car. I'm trying to think of other examples where one car has made a massive gain in a year without, a new set of regulations. Maybe Toyota back in the day? No, actually, no, they didn't. I was thinking 2005 compared to 2004, but there was a set of regulation changes. Yeah, it is rare to see such a leap forward, it really is rare. So yeah, very exciting. Tony Touch, except for Mercedes and Alfa Romeo, why didn't teams use the C5? Is it their tyre degradation? The reason really is because the C5 compound, we're not going to see that much of this season. I mean, we'll see it, Monaco, Singapore, Monza, maybe. You know, we'll see it at tracks where there's not, you know, passing too much and also not too much tyre deg. But really, the C5 tyre doesn't get seen a lot. But also, at the first Grand Prix next weekend, at the same track, of course, the C5 tyre won't be there. It'll be the C3, C2, C1. And then in Saudi Arabia and Australia, the softest tyre will be the C4. So that's why not many people used the C5 tyre, because it's not a tyre that you're going to use that much this season. So yeah, it's not like you're going to desperately need data on that tyre more so than the C4. You know, with at least single lap pace. Dylan Forrester asks, do you think Checo will put up any fight this year? No, I don't think he will. How many tenths fastest do you think Red Bull car is? Asks Mickey. I will get onto that later on, because I've done my predicted pecking order and I've done the gaps for what I think they are at the minute, for at least qualifying. Dario, as Alonso as hungry as ever, you could spot in his body language. He knows there's big potential in this project, just like the early Red Bull years. And yeah, I think also that's a great thing with Fernando, is that finally he has made a decision to move to a team, by the looks of it, at the right time. For the first time since, what? Well, since he moved from Minardi to Renault, I guess. But he didn't really move from Minardi to Renault because he had a year out in between. But this might actually be the first good driver lineup decision, or, you know, team that he's going to race for decision that Fernando's ever made. Because all the other ones have been not so great, let's say. Tony Touch asks, I wonder if any team will use a new C1 and try and do a one-stop. I think in Bahrain next weekend, it's probably going to be a two-stop race. Maybe certain teams will try a one-stop, but I think it's probably going to be a two-stop race. You do have to remember, these tyres, they are, I think, a bit more aggressive this season. I think they've got more grip in them, certainly on the front end, which I think was a complaint from the drivers last year, is that the front tyres didn't have a lot of grip. And also these cars, you can already tell, the pace difference compared to this time last year of the cars is mega. I think potentially these cars are at least 1.5 seconds quicker than they were this time last year, if not 2 seconds quicker than they were this time last year. So I think we are probably going to see more tyre deg in 2023, because I don't think Pirelli has probably... I don't think they foresaw such a gain in lap time from a lot of the teams. So yeah, I think probably two-stop race. Maybe some drivers try one stop, but yeah, I think probably a two-stop race. And then yeah, we'll see obviously what the tyre choices from Pirelli are later in the season, because I'm still pretty sure the Saudi Arabia and Australian Grand Prix will probably still be one-stop races if there isn't a safety car or virtual safety car. Mickey says all the cars look faster than last year. Yeah, maybe except for McLaren. We'll get onto them in a minute. I mean, maybe on pure lap time they are, but yeah, they look pretty bad. Willow on Gaming says, going to McLaren for 2007 had the potential to be the right move, but we all know why that wasn't a good decision. Yeah. I think going in, it looked like a great decision because McLaren had a really good car. And McLaren was still a front-running team, but yeah, Lewis Hamilton happened. If Alonso had like a really obedient number 2 driver, I think Alonso probably would have won the championship in 2007. And maybe 2008 as well. So, yeah, how history could have been different. But Lewis Hamilton absolutely deserved his place there. And I think I will leave it there with the comments for now. But I will come to you guys soon. Again, once I go through the next bit of stuff that I'm going to go through in here on the stream. But I think we're going to probably go a bit quicker now with the midfield teams, because obviously we've already been going an hour and 15 minutes and we've only got gone through the top 4 teams. So let's get into the rest of the teams. So let's go, hold on, let's go on, now to the Alpine team. And yeah, like I said at the start of this stream, there's nothing really I can say about them. The car handling-wise looks good. Reliability looks good. What we're hearing from Alpine sounds good. They sound pretty confident. They've got an upgrade coming to the first race, but we didn't see any indication as to what their pace was like. Gasly did his best time, and the best time for Alpine of testing was a 1:32.7 on the C3 tyre. Yeah, that's way slower than they'll be going in qualifying this next weekend with Alpine. At least I hope. And my hope is that the reason they're sandbagging so much is because they are about to show an absolute explosion of pace and maybe make it 5 front-running teams in 2023. That would be great, wouldn't it? But yeah, I think they're definitely at worst the 5th best team, Alpine. But we just need to see, at least in Friday practice, just a bit more pace to get a decent understanding of what they actually have. But it looks good on the track. I haven't seen any handling issues. And the speed traps also, from what I've seen of the speed trap data, it looks good. I think Gasly was second in the speed traps on day 3, or at least was one of the top few drivers. So I think Alpine have got something here to be happy about, but I just don't know what exactly they've got. So we'll see next weekend. And we'll move swiftly onto the McLaren team, who are or have to come out of testing as the worst performing team. Not because they are the worst team, but because they have disappointed the most and, by the looks of it, have taken the biggest step backwards. McLaren came into the season saying, we're not going to start the season that well, and we're already managing down expectations. Even during testing, Zach Brown said development goals have not been met, and they have failed to reach their targets. And even Andrea Stella, their new team principal, was saying that there's a chance to get knocked out Q1 in the early part of the season. And yeah, from what I've seen of the McLaren on track, I can't see any obvious issues with the car. There was that really bad spin for Piastri at turn 10, on the entry to turn 10, where he started to come down the gearbox and started braking, and then the car just completely snapped on him, which looked really bad. Maybe an indication as to how bad the car is. But I think, as I said during my watch-alongs, the worst thing about the McLaren is there's no obvious issues with it, yet it looks, by the news, and sounds like they've got a bad car. That's the worst thing to have. At least if you've got a bad car, if there is obvious issues with it that you can see on the track, understeer, oversteer, stuff like that, then, you know exactly what you need to fix. But I didn't see any problems with the front or rear end. It looked fine to me. Maybe they weren't pushing as hard as they could have. I mean, their best lap time of testing was a 1:32.1, was it? Yeah, 1:32.1. You can see it on the bottom on the C3. So yeah, they didn't push as hard as they could have, but I really don't like what I'm hearing out of McLaren. Really don't like what I'm hearing. And yeah, I think this is going to be a really bad season for them. I think top 5 in the championship is pretty unrealistic. I don't think they'll finish last or anything, but yeah, this is going to be a bad season. And of course, the big issue they had last year was drag, and they had a real lack of straight line speed. We don't know yet fully if that issue is fixed and how bad their straight line speed may be. And obviously we'll find that out in qualifying next weekend. So yeah, not looking good for McLaren. And let's quickly get onto some data regarding them. So, best lap time for the team, 32.1. That was done by Lando Norris yesterday on the C3. The only data I could pick up from testing with the long run pace, Piastri in the morning session, I think yesterday, he did how many laps? 7 or 8 laps on the C2 compound, and his average lap time was a 140.3. Now, obviously that's very slow, a 140.3 on that tyre. The issue is with McLaren, they couldn't really do long runs in testing because they had to keep coming into the pits and re-strengthening the winglets on their car on the front because there were issues with them. And they actually put a statement out, I think, on Twitter regarding that. So McLaren haven't really themselves got good data from long runs. So I don't even think McLaren know what their pace is like on a long run or even a shorter run necessarily. But yeah, everything we're hearing out of McLaren is bad. So I'm going to assume this is going to be a bad season. And by the looks of it, sadly, McLaren have thrown away all of the good work they did from 2019 until the end of 2021. How sad. And I think a certain Mr. Norris might need to get on his bike and go find another team. I'm not sure McLaren can get it done for him. You know, make a front-running championship-winning car, which is really sad. Anyway, we'll move on from them, and we'll go on to the Alfa Romeo team, who, after day one, things didn't look great. The handling looked pretty bad. Rear end looked a bit all over the place. There was a few lockups at turn 10. Bottas obviously had a Ferrari power unit failure on day 3. But the pace definitely looked better on day 2 and day 3. And from what I've been hearing from journalists, I guess the sound coming out of Alfa Romeo sounds good in terms of what their pace and performance is like. And with the data that I'll get into in a second, yeah, it does look pretty decent for them. They look as though they're probably as good as they were at the start of last season. So, yeah, I think if you're an Alfa Romeo fan, if there is any Alfa Romeo fans out there, I think, yeah, you can be hopeful going into the start of the season at least. After that, we'll see how they develop. But yeah, things are looking good, I think, for Alfa Romeo. They're not going to be one of the top 5 teams, I don't think, but they are going to be probably getting at least one car into the top 10 in qualifying and probably scoring a few points in the first race. And yeah, I think the start of this season could be as good as it was last season. Yeah, look good for Alfa Romeo. And let's quickly go through some data with them. So the best lap time for the team was a 130.8. That was done by Valtteri Bottas on the C5 compound. I think that was pretty close, or a bit closer to their full potential there from Alfa Romeo than other teams showed. But yeah, Bottas, he did do on day 3, I think earlier on in the afternoon session, he did do a full-on long run and a full-on basically race stint. And you can see there the average lap times for each tyre. Bottas started on the C1 tyre and his average time was a 39.8. And then he went on to the C2, average lap time for that, 39.0. And then C3, average lap time, a 37.3. Now, how good are these times necessarily? Well, obviously, the average time on the C3 looks really good because it's quicker than Red Bull and Aston Martin's average lap time on that tyre. But remember, Red Bull, I think, didn't quite show their full hand on the race pace or on the long runs they did. And when Aston Martin did their long run yesterday on the C3, again, their average lap time was a 38.7. Alonso had probably about 40 to 50 laps worth of fuel on board. When Bottas, because he did the C3 stint as his last stint, probably had, 10, 15 laps left? So, yeah, you could probably add 2 seconds to that lap time. So it's probably more like a low 39 or a mid 39 maybe at worst. Or at worst there for Alfa Romeo. So Alfa Romeo are definitely slower than Aston Martin. And when you also compare how Bottas did with his average time on the C2 and C1 compared to Alonso, Bottas, 39.0 on the C2, would have been on heavier fuel than Alonso was on the C2. Yeah, not too bad of a lap time on the C2, I would say, from Bottas. And then obviously Valtteri started off on the C1 and did an average time of a 39.8. Alonso 37.5, but Valtteri probably had, I don't know, a second and a half more fuel on board in terms of lap time. So yeah, Alfa Romeo definitely slower than Aston Martin, but I would say they're probably right around Alpine, 5th, 6th in the pack. That's where I think they are to start the season. So yeah, looks good for Alfa Romeo, and hopefully, they start the season as well as they did last season. But let's now get into the final 3 teams, and we will now go on to AlphaTauri. And bit of a quiet test. Their car didn't look too great handling-wise on the first day, but they got over that with some setup changes. Did lots of long runs. Yuki Tsunoda did do some impressive low-fuel runs on the C4 tyre. Did a 131.2 on the C4 tyre. And AlphaTauri's short fuel, low fuel pace, whatever you want to call it, does look at least competitive with teams like Haas and probably Alfa Romeo, maybe to a certain extent Alpine as well. Race pace, though, not too great from them. But yeah, reliability-wise, looked fine. And yeah, just looked like an okay pre-season test for them. Let's just get into the data for them quickly. So yeah, best time for the team, 31.2, done by Tsunoda. Again, C4 compound. And yeah, puts AlphaTauri in a position where they'll be fighting and qualifying with Alfa Romeo, maybe Alpine, Haas as well, and McLaren, and maybe Williams. And then the race run data there on the C3, C2, and C1 was the long runs there were done by Nick De Vries. So he started on the C2, and his average lap time for that was a 41.1. Then went on to the C1, that was an average time of a 140.1, and then ended on the C3, which was a 139.0. Also important to remember, he did that long run in the morning session, so the temperatures weren't fully representative of what we're going to be seeing in in the first Grand Prix weekend. But yeah, I would say that I'd say the pace, if you compare that to what Bottas did, for example, Bottas, on the C3 did a 37.3 with low fuel or lower fuel, and De Vries did a 39.0. I think in the more representative conditions, I think De Vries probably gets a bit closer, but I think AlphaTauri are definitely slower than Alfa Romeo over a single lap, and probably with their race pace as well. And yeah, I think AlphaTauri are going to be probably one of the maybe 3 worst teams with their race pace. It's going to be really close with Haas, though, because as I'll show in a moment, their pace doesn't look too great either over the long runs. And we'll get just straight into Haas. I'm going to try and finish up the stream because I need to, I think, have some tea. in a second, and I've almost been going, or I've been going hour and a half now. But yeah, let's get into Haas quickly. And yeah, Haas car looked good. No real handling issues. They're definitely not going to be a top 5 team or anything, but yeah, car looks good. Drivers sound happy. Car was reliable. And yeah, I think if you're a Haas fan, I think you could be decently how would I describe this? I think you're probably gonna have what you had last season, but a bit more of what you had last season in terms of the results. But yeah, was a good, I think, preseason test for them. We'll quickly get into the data with them. Kevin Magnussen and the team's best lap time, 131.3 on the C4 compound. Again, it puts Haas, I would say, in a position where they're going to be as competitive as AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, maybe Alpine as well in qualifying. The issue, just like last year and the last few years, is race pace. So Magnussen, he did a race stint on day 3. Started on the C3 tyre, where he did an average time of a 1:41.0, which is really bad. And I got to say, when you go look at that stint, his lap times dropped off very quickly. So the Haas has got pretty bad tyre deg. C2 compound he then went on to. That was a 39.5, the average time. And then the average time on the C1, which he finished on, a 38.6. Compared to the Alfa Romeo, obviously the Alfa Romeo for its middle stint, went onto the C2 and did a 39.0. Magnussen did a 39.5, so yeah, half a second difference there, and I think that's probably realistic because of Haas's tyre deg issues. I think that's realistic for what the pace difference is going to be. So yeah, Haas are going to struggle a lot on race days, but qualifying, I think they might get a few top 10 finishes in qualifying this season. And finally, very quickly, we'll go through Williams, who didn't show us a ton of what they had in testing. Their best lap time was, and I may as well just go straight into their data. Their best lap time was a 1:32.5. Logan Sargent did that time on the C5 tyre. I mean, compared to all the other teams, it was pretty slow, that lap time, but I do think there's more pace there. I think they were just focusing a bit more on the long runs. Talking of long runs, Albon did a long run on... We're in the afternoon session. Only used, though, the C3 and C2, and he only did like 30 laps or so, I think. Yeah, started on the C3, average lap time of 39.6, then on to the C2, and then was doing a 38.4. So good, consistent lap times. It looks as over in the Williams, so no tyre deg issues. But when you compare that to Bottas on the C3, 37.3 average time, but he was on, his final stint, so a lot lower fuel probably. Yeah, the Williams definitely slower than the Alfa Romeo. How much slower? A few tenths of a second probably. I think Williams have probably got a similar car to, say, McLaren, race pace wise. Qualifying wise, I think McLaren for the season will be quicker, but I think in the races, Williams are going to be fighting with McLaren to a certain extent. But Williams are definitely, at best, say, 9th in the pecking order. But yeah, those are all the teams. And I think quickly, I'll just go through a last few bits of data. And I hope you guys have enjoyed all of this data. Been great to go through it all, and really does give you a much better idea as to what the pace looks like for all the teams. But just want to get into these last few bits quick. So the best testing lap times, once again, Sergio Perez, quickest, 1:30.3. That's the quickest time the Red Bull did. Then Hamilton second, 1:30.6 on the C5. Bottas third, 1:30.8 on the C5. Leclerc fourth, 31.0 on the C4. Tsunoda fifth, 31.2 on the C4. Magnussen sixth, 31.3 on the C4. Alonso seventh, 31.4 on the C4. Norris eighth, 32.1 on the C3. Sargent ninth, 32.5 on the C5. And Gasly 10th, 32.7 on the C3. Again, I'm going team by team rather than just the 10 best times overall to show the best lap time for each team and what each team could do at their absolute best. But then what I did was I decided to do a tyre corrected version. And I've tyre corrected it to the C5 tyre. So what I've done is basically adjusted the lap times and positions based on the lap times to what it would have looked like if everyone had done their best times on the C5 compound. Because the C5 compound around Bahrain should be about a third of a second quicker than the C4. Here is the tyre corrected version. So Perez would be first on a 30.0, 0.6 of a second quicker than Hamilton. And then Leclerc would be just behind on 30.7. But I do believe that Ferrari have a bit more pace to show. So don't think that Ferrari are slower than Mercedes over a single lap, because I don't think that's the case. Bottas fourth, 30.8. Tsunoda fifth, 30.9. Magnussen sixth, 31.0. Alonso seventh, 31.1. Again, Aston Martin, I think they've got a bit more to show over a single lap. They did not show, I think, the maximum of what they've got in qualifying trim, because they concentrated a lot more in the afternoon session yesterday on race runs. Norris 8th, 31.3. Gasly 9th, 31.9. And Sargent 32.5 still, because obviously he did his best time anyway on the C5 compound. So, after all of that, and all of the race run data I went through, I have done a pecking order for qualifying and the race. In terms of qualifying trim and race trim, what does the order, in my opinion, look like going into the first Grand Prix at least? And remember, this is only for the first Grand Prix at least. This is not what the pecking order is, in my opinion, for the whole season in qualifying trim and race trim. So, for qualifying, this is what I think it will be in Bahrain. Red Bull first, Ferrari second. Yes, I am going for them 0.7 of a second behind. I don't think anyone gets close to Red Bull. Mercedes third, a second down. Aston Martin, couple tenths away from them. Alpine fifth, 1.4 down on Red Bull. Alfa Romeo and Haas just a tenth behind. AlphaTauri 8th, couple tenths behind them. I think maybe I'm underselling what their qualifying pace is like, but I think in Bahrain, because Alfa Romeo and Haas have got Ferrari power units, they're probably going to be a bit quicker than AlphaTauri. But during the season, it'll ebb and flow between those three teams. McLaren 9th, 2 seconds down on Red Bull, and yeah, I think they're going to struggle to start, and Williams just a couple tenths of a second behind them. So that's what I think the pecking order is in qualifying trim going into the first race. Now let me get into my race pace pecking order. Now, just to clarify for this, I've done the order, obviously, but I've not put the gaps, because it's a lot harder to tell the gaps between each car at the minute in race trim. So, I have gone Red Bull Racing first, Aston Martin second. Yes, I am going for it. I think Aston Martin will have the second quickest car in Bahrain in the race. I know it's a big prediction, but from what I've seen, I think it's possible. Mercedes third, Ferrari fourth, and then I think it'll be Alpine fifth, Alfa Romeo sixth, AlphaTauri seventh. Haas will drop off to eighth because of their tyre deg, and then Williams will be ninth, and I think McLaren will have the slowest car in Bahrain in the race. Let me know, guys, whether you agree or disagree in the comments section. I'll be very interested to hear what you guys have to say on that. But that's what I think the pecking order is. I am fully prepared to be massively wrong. A lot of people are massively wrong once the racing gets underway. But I think I am near enough to what it actually will be. But yeah, that is pretty much, guys, the end of the stream. Again, I won't be able to come to you guys in the chat because, yeah, it's getting late and I do want to get off. But before I do, just want to get into what my next couple pieces of content are on the channel. So I will be live next on Tuesday night at 8 PM UK time to do my full season preview. And what I'll be doing in that is obviously looking at, what the pace looks like at the minute from what I've obviously shown you guys as well. And then really just thinking over how is that going to translate into a 23 race season. And obviously give my final predictions. I'll try and get my co-commentator Niblo's predictions as well. See what he thinks. And make sure to come along to that. Because I want to hear from you guys as well as to what you absolutely think will happen in 2023. And then on Thursday night, Thursday 2nd of March, next Thursday, live at 8 PM UK time again, I will be doing a 2023 Bahrain Grand Prix weekend preview where I'll be previewing the race, but from a more track-specific point of view. Because obviously, depending on the circuit, the pecking order does change around. Because certain cars suit different circuits and vice versa. It'd be great to have you guys along for those couple pieces of content. And yeah, those are the next 2 pieces of content on your way. Like I said, on Monday, which is obviously tomorrow, I'll be announcing my full slate of content for March, so make sure to pay attention to that. That'll be posted in the community tab of my homepage. But guys, that is it for this stream this evening. Thank you so much for coming to this full review of testing. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this and all the Bahrain Grand Prix content coming your way next weekend. Before you go, don't forget to smash the like button and share this video and channel everywhere you can. And don't forget as well to follow me on Twitter at ChazHD5 to keep up with the content on this channel, and join my Discord server as well. Link below to that in the description for more content like this. But guys, I hope I've informed you well enough as to what's going to happen, in my opinion, for the first Grand Prix in Bahrain pace-wise, and I've informed you well enough, hopefully, as to what the performance looks like for all the teams coming out of testing. And yeah, we'll see what happens in Bahrain. Only 5 days until FP1, and obviously tomorrow it'll be 4 days away. But until my full season preview on Tuesday night, again, 8 PM UK time, make sure to be there. It has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.